Yo, 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 yo. What's up, all you burner stoners and potheads, and especially all you gardeners out there? Welcome to the Grow Hour with Mr. Weedman and Big Earl. And we got a special guest come back on the show, Terp Fiend. Welcome back, my friend. How you doing, brother?
What's good, Weedman? How's it going, buddy?
We're doing good, man. Doing good. Just ready to get normal, I guess, as I'm calling it now. Yeah. I'm not calling it let's get high. Let's just get normal.
Right.
So before we get started, thanks for coming back on the show. We appreciate it. Big Earl, we're going to get baked. We're going to get normal, right? Yeah. So what are you smoking, my friend?
I rolled up a couple of the Chem Sister Cross the Psychosis cheese.
No.
Yeah.
I have some of that.
That sounds all kinds of nasty.
It is. So the selection I made, it wasn't the absolute terpiest as far as like the overall terp, but it was the most complex. So it's just kind of a little bit of everywhere, depending on if it's the beginning of the joint, the end of the joint, the beginning of the hit, the end of the hit. I like it a lot.
Nice. Terp, what are you smoking on, brother?
Chiquita berries. And it's strange because it came to me, the reason I got it originally was because it was a Chiquita banana cross, and there's absolutely no banana, there's no berry. It smells like burnt match heads and gas, and there's almost nothing that I expected in it, so it was an absolute surprise in the best ways.
Man, liking it, huh?
Yeah.
How's the high?
Oh, awesome.
How's the high?
Yeah, awesome. You know, it's I have a hard time with nuance when it comes to highs. For me, I'm kind of either baked or I'm not, unless it just really makes me insanely, speedy. I don't find a lot of those. I don't smoke a lot of 12-week sativas myself. But yeah, man, it that gets the job done. It dumped really well when I sifted it and made dry hash. It was tons of keef, so it's really, really awesome.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. And I'm smoking for the first time peanut butter breath grown by Mr. Big Earl over there. Thanks, Earl.
Yeah. That was the only
you want to talk a little bit about this one?
That was a tester seed. I run my seeds a little differently. I think a lot of people clone and then they run their clones into there. But usually I clone and I flip my seed plant. Because I like to see how the first level of those clones act anyway. But I know a lot of people like to take their actual clones off the seed plant, which makes sense, I guess.
Very piney.
Yeah, only about 3 or 4 ounces of that out there.
Yeah, the nugs were beautiful, but very piney tasting.
I had a weird experience with that one. Like, I've run a lot of their genetics. 90% of it has been just knock your socks off. Like, the garlic breath has been amazing. But I had one of the worst runs I ever had with the peanut butter breath. And it was, I really couldn't tell you at the end of the day the problem, but I washed the whole thing. So it was all a tester batch going into rosin. And I'm not going to lie, it probably put out a couple grams of hash. Like, it was so horrible that I kicked myself for not having just trimmed it all, because there was plenty there, and it was actually really nice weed. But it's just one of those examples of, like, just because it looks good doesn't mean it's going to make great water hash, and not all strains drop heads, and it was, put it this way, it was embarrassingly bad and was a complete and utter waste of material. But, I don't necessarily blame genetics. Like, it was a mixed pheno batch, which is just kind of weird, those can always be a little off, but yeah, I don't know.
That means all of them were real bad, right? Like, there's not.
That would essentially mean all of them. None of them. It was probably 5 or 6 different phenos. They were all super cushy, like really short, really squat, lots of resin. They looked beautiful, which blew my mind. Like, it was really one of those where you just go, and that's the nature of water hash, man. It's so fickle and it's so weird, and you never know.
Yeah. 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 I was expecting more of the peanut butter on it. A lot of people talk about the peanut butter side of the peanut butter breath, and I was expecting a little bit more of the cream, but it was definitely Mendo leaning on everything. A little bit of the pine and earthy too, but it was fire. It's like you said, it was good. I haven't washed it yet.
Nice. Well, now that we're all getting normal in a good way, you reached out to us because I posted something that made you kind of think, and I'm happy that you came and talked to us because you have some experience working in the large gardens out there, and safety's key, but also keeping people, from dying. That young girl that passed away from breathing in all that keef and all that dust and stuff like that, when probably not wearing a mask. And you said you had some experience in that. So talk a little bit about large gardens and give us a little bit of example of what you've ran through.
So let me start with kind of how and when problems kind of arise in big gardens, in a simple fact that if there's no regulation whatsoever, so in a completely unregulated market, people can do whatever they want. People are going to do whatever they can to solve problems. And it's usually the easiest way possible. So the first thing they're going to do is spray stuff. So in my experience, I've seen everything from 15,000 square foot gardens to 180,000 square foot gardens indoors. Most of my experience is in indoor gardens. The big difference between indoor and outdoor, for the most part, on scale, is control. I mean, that's always going to be the, I don't want to call it the advantage to indoor gardening, but it's the reason that we grow so much weed indoors still, when it's not really a crop that is made to be grown under fake lights and big, huge warehouse rooms. So the best thing I can do is kind of start with Colorado, which is what I had a lot of experience in, and how their market started versus where it is today. And this will mirror almost all of your legal states. They're almost all going to follow a very similar pattern. So when they first pass legalization, whether it's medical, rec, whatever the situation, immediately there's going to be very little oversight for things like pesticides, worker safety, OSHA, anything. A lot of these grows start on shoestring budgets. Most of them are built in buildings that aren't made for cannabis. They weren't purpose built for weed. So they're, things like HVAC, internal workings of how, drains and things are all laid out. Most of that sort of stuff is an afterthought, because they're going into lumber warehouses. They're going into old car garages. You don't know how many roll-up doors I saw in Colorado. Now, mind you, it gets negative degrees in Colorado in the winter. How many roll-up doors I saw that would just freeze as a block of ice, because it's not built to run 75-degree lights inside and it be 30 degrees outside or less. So what happens is immediately there's almost no regulation. No pesticides, nothing. As the program develops, they get more money, they get more opportunities to bring more bodies in. There starts to be a process of, okay, we need more regulation, and we need to do it as far as, usually pesticides is the number one, what can be sprayed and what can't be sprayed. The other big one, like I said, is employee safety. Like, you don't realize how many times people are on top of, ladders working on top of grows in situations where I've seen ladders on top of rolling tables with people on top of them. Yep. And this is a fairly regular thing in the cannabis industry, commercial cannabis industry, because there's so much of like, we got a quick problem, we need a quick fix because we got other situations.
And they don't have that money. Like, it's like, at least with my experience with it, you have to take down like your air conditioning sleeves. You have a ladder. Well, you can buy another 4-foot tall ladder, but they're not going to put that money into it. So get on your tippy toes, reach up around that thing, and slide it down the room. Get it off.
Exactly. A third of this conversation will center around money. The fact that there's never enough of it, even though there's trillions of dollars coming in, how that money's handled, because these are all super unique problems to the cannabis industry. Some of them are being addressed, some of them aren't. But yeah, like you said, man, there's no thought of like, the problem becomes that most of these grows aren't built by weed people. So if you don't know the basics of how to grow 10 plants, you're never going to figure out how to grow 10,000 plants. So a lot of these grows are in a perpetual state of, let's chase the next, right? The next crop, the next build out, the next check, whatever it is, there's a constant, there's never a surplus. So as we get into, just the basics of pesticides, harm as far as what you're going to get on your plant that's going to be dangerous, right? Most people don't know what is used on commercial cannabis. Most people don't know commercial cannabis is sprayed daily, weekly, monthly. If you have a reasonable IPM process, which is integrated pest management, or some sort of cleaning process, you're probably going to be on the better end. But the worst of what you may see on your weed can be anything from a product called mallet, which is a pesticide for kills mites, kills gnats, kills just about anything it touches. It will kill. It's also pretty nasty to smoke. The other big one is Avid. Avid is a product that's sold in every commercial grow shop. It is it's literally an analog of the stuff they give you to put on the back of your dog's neck for fleas. It's literally, and this is another thing. It's systemic, so it stays in the plant, and it's another thing that you don't want to smoke.
Yeah,
you don't want to smoke.
There's a couple other products too, but Avid's the big one.
They're all pretty similar, and I'm using. Once again, I'm kind of using brand names because that's what people are going to recognize. It doesn't say abamectin on the front of it, but that's it, exactly. You're right. There's, like I said, and that's almost the same thing Joe Rogan was telling people to take. It's very similar to the, anti-pest, the deworming. That's what they use it for in veterinary purposes, horses and stuff. But very similar product. It's great at killing bugs. It's amazing. You don't want to smoke it. The big one, especially if you live in an area, the Pacific Northwest, Colorado, anywhere with a history of cannabis growing and cold dry, powdery mildew. Everybody's probably heard about it. You hope you haven't seen it. If you've seen it, you know you have a problem. When you see it in a commercial grow, your options are fairly slim as far as things that you can spray that aren't terribly nasty. So the big one is Eagle 20. And we've all had a joke about Eagle 20. We've all had a ha-ha about it, but it's a very real thing in the commercial cannabis industry. Sprayed on tons of plants. You've probably smoked it, whether you know it or not. If you've ever smoked dispensary weed, Cali Outdoor, if you've ever smoked, let's be honest, Cali Outdoor probably at any given point in this country makes up a disproportionate amount of the cannabis market of what's smoked in black markets across the country. And so these are kind of the easy ones, right? And what happens is when these grows, dispensaries start their progress in their legal domain, they essentially don't think that people are just going to spray stuff. So there's usually initially no laws, no regulations, nothing really on the books about this. So as they come in, what usually happens is they ban the nasty, nasty stuff. In Colorado, at least, they came in, they said, you can't use Avid, you can't use, they had a very short list of things. Most of them were biological agents. So bacterial products that essentially like attack powdery mildew, other bacterial products that attack various bugs and various things in the soil. The problem with these things is they produce yeast as a byproduct. Anything bacterial is going to produce yeast. So then you start to see when the testings for Eagle and Avid start to come down, the testing for yeast starts to go ridiculously high. Wow. Because everybody's using biological things that they're technically organic and it's technically stuff we can use. But here's the problem, man. When I started growing weed in the late 90s, it was all about you knew your friends were going to smoke it. You knew your family was going to, you were going to smoke it. in a big commercial grow, there's never once a thought that somebody has to smoke this. There's a thought that we grew it. Now we got to sell it. You know, we have to pay the bills. We've now paid for however many months with the lights on and paid for employees. So now we have to figure out, how do we sell this, right? So one of the things that Earl mentioned in our discussion about kind of topics for the day was remediation, which has now become a big topic in the cannabis industry, especially in the large commercial industry. The nice way to put remediation is turning poop into slightly less smelly poop. And as much as I hate to say that, like, it's what it is. The first time I ever heard the term remediation was specifically for hash. And because, you know, I worked in the hash industry for some years. My wife worked in the hash industry for some years. And so in distillate, essentially distillate, what everybody sees in a cart, when you go buy a cart from wherever you acquire your carts from, that's essentially what we've always joked as hot dog water. Because that's all the stuff that they couldn't turn into something else that goes into a big vat. It gets extracted with ethanol. It usually either gets pulled through distillation or some, CO2 extraction or something like that. And it's the base of the base. It's essentially just stripping the THC and everything poopy stays. So, hypothetically, there's a couple, and then the last few years we've seen what they call CRC, which is a color remediation, which is another process of taking poop and trying to turn it into slightly more palatable poop so that somebody will buy it because we grew it and now we have to make money on it, And we get into kind of what Earl was talking about earlier, the money problem. The biggest problem that the cannabis industry as a whole has, they can't handle money, they can't have money, they can't put money in a bank. Now,
but wait, real quick, one more thing about money. If they go on the stock exchange, if they get publicly traded, now they have to own up to the investors.
Yeah.
So they're cutting corners. They're cutting corners every different direction because they got somebody else that really truly owns the business and telling them what to do.
That's pretty much most of them, because most of them are beholden to investors, to people who have, kicked in on some. Like I said, it's an expensive thing to start. It's an expensive thing to run. It's an expensive thing to do continuously. So, you're constantly begging people for money. Like your whole, as much as I hate to say it's what it is, you're looking for new investors. You're looking for new people to come on. So the biggest problem with money is the banking issue. And so what we see is that because you can't just take $1 million or $12 million and stick it in a bank, the banks that will take your money, you don't want to put that kind of money into, places like Bank of America that will just literally take your money. And, there's a few workarounds within the cannabis industry because most companies have payroll. They have, they pay taxes. You better pay your taxes. And so essentially they use banks, and the banks they use know that they're cannabis companies, but they wouldn't dare put the bulk of their profit into a bank, their workload into a bank. So what happens is there's an unnatural inflation in the cannabis industry. Because they can't put the money in the bank, that money has to go towards your next build out, your next grow, your next lab. You always have to be putting cash into because you can hand that money to a contractor. You can hand that money to the state licensing board. You can do any of the normal business transactions with that cash. You just can't take it and stick it in a bank, So inevitably, every one of these companies, like you said, is pretty much taking the money that they make, putting it into their next grow while begging for the money for their next whatever. Most of the commercial grows in the U.S. right now never once thought of a 5-year plan, of a 10-year plan. Forget anything past that. So what so many of them have done is they build enough to make it pretty. So when they drag the investors in who aren't weed people, who don't know anything about cannabis, they can show them all these rows of plants and all this huge grow, space and everything full of weed. The reality is they don't know that it's covered in mold. They don't know that it's covered in bugs. They don't really know the real problems because they're not weed people. So the problem becomes all they have to do is make it look great for the next custody, the next investor, the next whoever that's going to come in, take what they've bought and take it as their startup. And that's what we see so many of these companies. You have two options. You build it from the ground up, super expensive, super time consuming, really tough in some states because of the licensing and who can own what and this and that and how it's weird. And then you have people that literally just want to buy up the next grow and add it either to their resume of ridiculous grows that they're barely controlling at the time, or they push it on to the next guy and it just goes on. What I've seen grows that have literally been owned by 4 corporations in their lifespan. So many of these grows start out as ma and pa grows. They get to a point where they drag somebody in and sell it all to them, and then it goes to the next company. That company gets eaten up by an acquisition of a larger company. So now they're a third name, and then they get bought out literally for their IP. The next company just wants to be able to come in and take everything that they've done and use it in their grows. So it's, as we get into like the money issue, it's compounded by the fact that A, you can't really bank. B, none of these grows are set up on any long-term structure of success. And the reality is, as long as they can make it look like it's successful to somebody who knows nothing about weed, they can probably sell it, make a couple $1 million and cash out.
Instead of worrying about all that expense, just take the money, you got the license, just sell it and get the fuck out quick, so you don't have to deal with everything that comes with it.
Yeah, and like I said, man, I'm saying this from a place it's almost cliche within the industry, because it's happening every single day, and then another new state goes legal, and it all happens again, and it all happens again. And funny enough, it's been happening in California for 50, 60, 70 years. They go legal, it all happens again. And it's all the same story, man. It's all people who aren't involved with cannabis, usually. 90% of the people at the top ends of most of the commercial cannabis companies are people that were involved with real estate and had warehouses sitting around, that were people that were involved with finance, hedge fund people, big money people. They're not weed people. So most of them don't know what a great grow looks like, nor do they really care. There's a little bit of they don't have to look the person that's buying it in the eyes. They know that. So there's very little management as far as how it's handled, how it's, what's sprayed on it, how it's trimmed and post-processed. That's a whole nother just really nasty thing.
Let me ask you a question about spraying. Are the big grows spraying terpenes on their weed? I've read a few things about that.
It's not something.
Spraying terpenes like a synthetic terpene you'd put into.
Yeah, I know they're spraying essential oils. Like there's tons of grows that are spraying essential oils for pesticide control. Like absolutely, but as far as terpenes, I don't know. I don't.
What about other cannabinoids? You think they're spraying like
a synthetic cannabinoid and they're enhancing the flower?
So here's the problem, right? The only way that you can really do that and it be effective is the way they do it with Delta 8. So they take finished product and then spray that and then let that dry.
Like an MCT oil and like a
I've seen everything from ethanol to just any sort of carrier. So they just literally spray it, dry it, dehydrate it, and you can usually tell because it's usually dark. It's usually almost, I'm gonna be honest, most of the time it smells like mold because it's not properly dried. Once again, I wouldn't be surprised, but it would seem like a gross waste of money on the thing about commercial grows, especially big grows, is every nickel matters because the margins are so razor thin. And when you have a problem in a massive grow, there's no such thing as a small problem. Even a small problem in a huge grow is a huge headache. So it's like when you look at things like that, I would probably guess somebody has done that. Do I think that huge cannabis growers are doing it as a regular thing? Seems like a waste of money because terpenes are not cheap, especially when you want to buy them in bulk. Like it's not something that's, cheap and you can just spray it all over a 100,000 square foot garden. You might be able to hit a table, but it's just not something that I think is really feasible. But I guarantee you somebody's done that. Yeah, if you thought about it, somebody else has done it. Surely, that's just how it works these days. There's no original ideas anymore.
Also, a lot of that was like most of these big gardens and most of these people. There are some pretty badass cannabis companies out there. I've worked with people that are like, they don't support the shitty people. They do it right. They have all their protocol in order, and they have their degrees and their experience and everything's just lined up perfect for them. So that's, I think, important too, because some of these guys are badasses.
Those are absolute unicorns.
Yes, those are the
for every company that's anywhere close to what you just described. There's probably 2,000 or 3,000 companies out there that are the polar opposite. Employees hate their jobs. They literally are just in the meat grinder. They bring them in for $8, $9, $10 an hour. They don't really pay anybody because, like I said, margins are razor thin. They're expendable, so you'll be gone the next day if you even speak up about the terrible conditions that you've seen.
And you can take advantage. People are excited to be in the community, especially younger people. So you can take advantage of that workforce really
they try to get people to sign a non-disclosure.
Oh, I've signed dozens of those. I wipe my ass with every one of them. Yeah. The things aren't worth the paper. Because a non-disclosure, and I always tell people this for anybody that gets in a situation and has a bad feeling in their stomach because somebody asked you to sign an NDA or a non-compete agreement or whatever, those papers are only as good as the company that can enforce them. So if they don't have the money to chase you down and pay exorbitant amount of legal fees over something that's fairly small, just assume they're not going to. I mean, most of them, I signed dozens of those. Not one of them was ever worth the paper it was printed on because most of the cannabis companies that I've seen from the inside, aside from one or two, were places that were smaller, that didn't really have a budget to go spend, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on lawyer fees to chase you down over an NDA. Like, everybody wants you to sign them.
Most of them think they have something special, and at the end of the day, it's like, man, you have some like half put together practices, and like you had nothing here.
Dude, I've worked for so many companies that were literally working with somebody else's IP. Everything was created by somebody else, but they defended that like it was their last dollar. They defended it and went after anybody that tried to, and it was all IP that you can generally find on the internet. I got to be honest with you. At this point, most of what people are doing in labs is on the internet somewhere. Everything is on the internet somewhere. If you want to know how your BHO is made, at least the ins and outs of it, that's on the internet. If you want to know how rosin's made and how melt is made, that's on the internet. It's everywhere these days. So the notion that anything you're really doing in your weed hash company, aside from genetics maybe, because genetics can be a little more proprietary in a degree. But yeah, I got to be honest with you. There's nothing happening in any of these labs that's unique, that's different, and that's not being done in 30, 40 other labs in your state, at least. Hash labs are real bad about that. They always feel like they've got something that nobody else has, and their methods are different. Everybody buys the same vac dryers. Everybody buys the same bags. Everybody has access to the same gear at this point. So the notion that you're doing something revolutionary with tools and IP that everybody has.
Yeah. That's in the garden a lot, even like, oh, I'm running this kind of light, or I'm running this way and this and that. And it's always funny.
Let me ask something about hash. Does anybody really truly do it the way it should be done anymore? Or they're all just using equipment now?
What do you mean? Be more specific.
The Afghani way to make it. The old school traditional way. Pack it down, beat it down, pack it down, beat it down. Is anybody doing that here?
Yeah. I mean, I make dry hash all the time as a personal thing. It's not a commercial thing. So part of what's happened over the last, we'll call it 20 years, is kind of the domestication of the hashish market in the United States. So prior to 04, 05, we'll just pick a number out of our ass, 04, 05. Prior to that, everything in this country that was smoked and consumed as far as hash went came from another country. It was imported from India, it was 100%. Imported from Afghanistan and Pakistan and North Africa and so as we've kind of gone into legalization and things have changed, that's all become domesticated now. Almost 100%. I don't remember the last time I saw Afghani hash in the U.S. I don't remember the last time I saw Indian charas in the U.S. It's usually a very niche thing, and somebody either smuggled it or keistered it, or there's some story you don't want to know. It went up a sheep's ass, or something strange happened, and there's some really good hash, and we're just not going to talk about how it got here, right? But the reality is, as we've kind of had more commercial grows come online, more big grows in other states, that's all become home product now. So now I would argue the United States is probably gram for gram producing more hash than any other region in the world right now, just because there's now so much legal grow space, indoor, outdoor, that, to be honest, and most of it probably stays here, but that's been a huge shift in the market. So that's a big reason why you don't see your old school dark taffy type hashes more.
That's the stuff I like.
But let's be honest. So one thing that we've kind of realized since then, since the hashish importation situation subsided, was that the best way to make that style of hash is bubble hash, is to make water hash first and then press it from there. Because it's just, water is the best way to separate trichomes. Like when you look at the process of some of that imported hash from other parts of the world, and it's almost a wonder sometimes that they get such amazing textures, because they're not overly processing it. It's not insanely sifted over 35 different microns, and it's not, they usually beat it over a sheet or two and press it. And it really speaks to, I think, just the quality of resin they're working with. That's really one discussion that comes before any other discussion in hash, is that material is king. And the better the material and the better the trichomes and the better the grow, the better the hash, period. It's always going to be the case. And we've also seen that areas that are closer to the equator tend to produce better resins consistently, because they're closer to the sun. And it's essentially, in a sense, it's a sunscreen for the plant. And heads get much bigger. That's why some of the best hash plants, the true equatorial sativa hash plants, like when you think hash plant, it's usually Afghan, Afghan, Pakistan, Kush. The reality is those have not traditionally been the best strains to make hash with. A lot of times they tend to have smaller trichomes, lots of 25 micron, like lower micron stuff that's more wax and less oil. Whereas when you see the big bulbous trichomes, when you see stuff that's like heavy in the 160 micron to 120 micron range, they're almost always sativa leaning hybrids. Almost all of them. Consistently. Almost all of them. So it all comes down to, like I said, material, genetics. But the reason you're not seeing more of that, you probably are used to it. Like I said, I think you are close in age. So that late 90s, we were still seeing a lot of that. And you could still get Afghan. I had a guy at a concert sell me some hash. It was overpriced. He told me the reason was it was the post 9/11 tax. This was like just 8 to 10 months after 9/11, but that's the reality. Was that a lot changed after September 11th, especially because we're back in those parts of the region causing chaos to some degree, as well as you just don't have those easy access with the borders and ways for things to get in. And I just shout out late Frenchie Cannoli was somebody who was very passionate about the type of hash that you're speaking of, and was really passionate about making bubble hash but finishing it the old style. But that's such a loaded question the way you asked it. Like, is anybody doing it the right way anymore? And I'm like, man, that's tough, bro, because I'm a hash aficionado, right? And I go back to the old school dark taffy types of hash. But, the one thing that we've seen in the domestication of the hash market, and especially on a commercial level, is purity. It's purity. And when you talk to some of these young guys that are working these hash labs, the ones that are doing it right are some of the most passionate people on the planet. You got to have a nasty tolerance to be involved in the hash game in the first place. So most of the bullshit gets separated at the door, to have a serious connoisseur conversation about hash in general. You usually are somebody who's been around the block a little bit, And so it's something that those kids are some of the most passionate folks, and they're pushing the field so far forward, and they're doing things that, a decade ago, 15 years ago, weren't happening. Before 2014, maybe 2013, 2014, nobody knew what rosin was. Rosin wasn't a thing. Live resin, the word live resin didn't really pop up until 2014, 2015. So so much of what we know now as commercial hash culture in the United States, the fact that almost everybody's grandma knows what a dab is, the fact that every person that I know, every female has a pen in their purse, every dude's got one in the pocket. So it's such a common, and that's all, we forget that it's all hash. To some degree, that's hash, like what I would call hash. It's all extracts. It's all some sort of extract or separation. But to me, it's all part of a larger culture that I am glad that is now an American thing. And it's something that's becoming very American in that we just almost don't see any imported product anymore at all.
Not in a long time. Let's move on real quick. Yeah. So let's talk about. We'll do another show on hash.
Bro, I'm telling you, I could do an hour on just about any topic, man. It's kind of like Mad Libs. You just give me a topic and we can talk about it.
I love it. Why is it almost impossible for a larger garden to get the quality right versus a small home grow can get?
If you want it in a word, control.
Give me the
control.
What was
it?
Control.
Yeah, and it just comes down to being able to watch variables as closely as possible, being able to put hands on plants, because it doesn't really matter how you slice it. Plants that are properly pruned will always produce better. Proper planting, proper pruning prevents poor performance. So getting all of that lower larvae shit out of the way really is going to make a difference. And being able to have enough hands to hit those plants enough to get everything stripped well, to get everything so that you're maximizing your yield as much as possible, that becomes a problem at a certain size. So one of the problems that that doesn't get talked about a lot in the cannabis industry is that there's absolutely a ceiling for purely organic growing. And it's something that people that grow organically don't like to discuss. It does happen on huge scales, but at a certain point, they're not always purely organic when you get to a massive scale. It's tough to grow anything, especially monocropped anything, in a situation like that, unless you really have serious heirloom varieties. And when you're just popping seeds and running hundreds of thousands of seeds on a farm, it's tough to keep that same organic standard when you're going to have problems. Like, it's not if, it's when. When you grow outdoors to scale, it's not if you have problems, it's how big they are. Like I said, there's no small problems. On an indoor grow, it's literally, like I said, it's a little bit more about how well you can control, as far as how much you can keep an eye on every regimen, every feed, making sure everything's dosed properly, everything's, and when I say most indoor commercial grows are not running organics. The organic indoor grow is another unicorn in the commercial cannabis industry.
Who run hydro in general probably aren't running super organic stuff. Like if somebody's running hydro, because
I've seen very few pure hydroponic water commercial grows. Those also aren't very popular. I've seen them. They're just not as common as you would think.
Yeah.
Because once again, the startup is expensive on a huge commercial hydro grow versus, doing something like cocoa. The problem with a lot of hydro is that the threshold for a mistake that's going to cost you thousands of dollars is very low. So the chance that somebody can make a small problem in a hydro grow and you lose a whole table is real high. Pumps go out, filters go out, people just make mistakes, and anything, temperature fluctuates, anything can cost you thousands in a pure hydro grow. Whereas in a grow that's a soilless mix like cocoa, or if you're old school like me, it used to be perlite and vermiculite. That was like the go-to for years and years, until cocoa became king. But yeah, in grows like that, when a mistake happens, the solution is super easy, and it almost never costs you a plant. In a soilless grow, you literally just make a new fresh medium mix or a new fresh newt mix, flush it until it comes out the same as in the top. Problem's usually gone 2 days later. Whereas that same problem in a purely hydro grow, it might have cost you your table with just nutrients being out of flux. It might have cost you a whole table of plants, and it's almost never like that in a commercial soilless grow. So most of the grows that I've seen, at least in Colorado, 90% were soilless mix, usually cocoa. I've seen a few sunshine grows. They almost always struggle because they don't know how to water it properly, because sunshine is essentially a peat-based medium. Anything peat holds water a little bit more than a cocoa will. A cocoa is literally just a sponge. Squeeze it and it's done. There's nothing there. So with with stuff like that, and once again, it all comes down to how big are the problems when they happen, how easy is the fix when something inevitably goes wrong, and how much is it going to cost us if that mistake is catastrophic. And so when you look at, like, with an organic grow, you immediately go, well, things are going to be cheaper, right? It's not really the case. At scale, it depends on what you buy and how you use it. It depends on how you deal with IPM and what your fixes are when you, once again, in a commercial grow, it's never if you get bugs. It's when you get bugs. Because there's so many people coming in and out of a commercial grow. Most of them are growers at home. Most of them are people that trade clones. Most of them are people that aren't necessarily super stringent about their own cleanliness and parameters of grow. So when you're running a huge commercial grow, it's not if you get bugs or if you get mildew or if you get problems. It's how you deal with it and how you try to prevent it. And so many, like I said, we get back to kind of the sprays as one option. The truth is, having proper environmental controls is the solution for 90% of your problems. Like being able to keep your grow at an exact temperature, an exact humidity, and to do that consistently, daytime and nighttime in a huge grow, it's one of your biggest problems. Because when you're thinking of a room that could be thousands of square feet and it's just a huge open pit, think about trying to cool that. Think about trying to heat that. Think about trying to heat that in the winter. Try to think about trying to cool it in the winter. So like most modern commercial ACs aren't built to cool in negative 12. Certain places where there's now commercial grows, Colorado especially, that's a common thing. You know, you got to cool your grow because your grow's getting too hot, but your ACs are freezing up because you kind of skimped out and didn't buy the big boy ACs. And once again, we get into the same, these grows weren't built, a lot of them weren't built with the brick and the mortar to be a grow. So much of it is either retrofitted, it's either kind of done haphazardly on the backside, we fix it as we go, or if you're lucky and you had a couple million to build out, you did it all right the first time. I didn't see too many of those either. I think that was a unicorn. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I know of one grow in Colorado that was essentially purpose built. And by everybody that I've spoken to in that grow, they got every problem every other commercial grow in Colorado has. You know, and that's the thing is like, so many of these conversations are the kind of cliched shit that we talk about when it's just us growers. And I've had this conversation 150 different times with every grower friend that I know. You know, it's usually like, we got that problem and we got that problem and we're not dealing with it well. And we had so much loss last round and and it's the same kind of stories because it's the same situations plot to plot to plot. Nobody really knows how to grow weed really well. A lot of these grows are kind of built on hamstring budgets and kind of function in weird ways that most, when I got to Colorado, one of the kind of legends that went around, and I don't remember which, I don't think I would say if I remembered which dispensary it was, but there was a kid that had reportedly gotten $1 million settlement because he had blasted himself in the face with a commercial fogger, like a commercial atomizer, full of Eagle 20.
Oh, man. Oh.
Now, I've been around that stuff once when it was being sprayed in a large commercial garden, and there are definitely neurological effects that we don't talk about that are inherent from just people being around it. Like, people were getting violent just from, like, it being in the air. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen, but, like, so many of those pesticides, especially when we talk about Eagle, that stuff's not made to be sprayed on weed. It's not meant to be sprayed on anything that's going to be smoked, for sure. And when it's smoked, it produces a form of cyanide gas that is super dangerous. Super dangerous.
And its half-life is 45 days. So even to think that it's out, like even after 90 days, you're still working with a pretty effective
Yep.
I forget the what Eagle 20 has in it, but it's still in there after 135 days. It's still in there.
Yeah, so it's a systemic fungicide that lives in the plant and essentially does the same thing that the fungus does that it's trying to attack. But like you said, it's essentially made for golf courses. It's meant to be sprayed on places where nobody's going to be around it, nobody's consuming it. The problem with a lot of these, like you said, it's usually that they're spraying it on late stage flower. So they get a problem, you're maybe third week into flower, and you go, I don't know what to do. What do we do? Like, we have to do something because we can't just let this problem exponentially increase. So, if you've got a decent grower, depending on how the problem is and how big the problem is, most stuff can be controlled, right? But if you've got terrible environmental controls, now you've got a problem. And there's really no instant quick fix other than the shit you shouldn't be spraying on people's weed. And it's the big problem is that there's probably Eagle 20 on your grapes. There's probably Eagle 20 on your citrus. Don't know if it's super dangerous like that, but smoking it is bad for you. It is bad for you. And so that's one of those that, like, I tell people, know where your product comes from. But if you're buying from a commercial grow, ask them specifically what is sprayed on your weed. Now, in Colorado, they have to put that on the product, on the labeling. But new states probably don't have that. New York probably doesn't have that yet. So, within the first 3 years of a commercial, of a rec system being set up, I would be very weary of the product that you smoke from anybody. Because in that first 3 years, what you have is a race to the bottom. Everybody tries to grow as much weed as they can, as quickly as they can, because there's not enough. We only put out 3 to 5 licenses for each municipality, or maybe there's 3 for the state. So there's almost never enough grows initially when a new program starts up. As that race to the bottom happens, you have all these people popping as much grow space as they can. Once again, they don't care whether they can control it, whether it's going to be healthy, whether the weed is going to be worth a shit. Just grow as much as fast as possible so we can sell it, because somebody's going to buy it, guaranteed. We don't have enough of it. So every bit of it's going to sell. In that process, people realize you can't run a business like that. You can't pump out as much dirt cheap product as possible when you're putting out $500 pounds, when you're literally selling on the commercial market pounds for unreasonable. There was at one point where there were pounds in the metric system in Colorado that were hundreds of dollars because new grows had come online and there was just tons of surplus. That product's not grown with any care. That product's not grown with any rationale as to how you're going to consume it, whether you're sick, whether you have cancer, whether you have an autoimmune disease. They don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. It's just product. And that's only going to get worse as more and more larger grows come online. And the thing that you as a consumer, or I as a consumer, have to be aware of is that A, this is happening, and B, is it happening to product that you're consuming? Is it happening to stuff that you're paying people your hard-earned money for?
Damn, that was good.
And I didn't even tell you about smoking bug carcasses. That's nasty. If you don't do anything, then you just get to smoke dead bugs.
Remediate.
How do we fix it? How do we fix it? How do we fix it by terp? How do we?
It has to start. It has to start at the consumer level. It has to start by every one of us learning what the good shit is and what the bad shit is. Every one of us becoming discerning customers, and places like that being forced out of business. If they can't sell shit product, they can't stay afloat. And the margins are so thin in the commercial cannabis market that the reality is most places that are around right now will not see federal legalization. They will either go out of business, sell out to somebody else, or something will happen that they will not be around. They'll get bought out or they will shut down. The number of businesses that are around right now that will be around once Budweiser can get involved in the game, once Philip Morris can get involved with the game legally, then you're really going to start to see that the best ones right now are going to get bought up by a bigger company, and the smaller companies won't be around. And the way that happens is by consumers learning that not all weed is created equal. Eventually, you're going to be able to buy a pack of pre-rolls at every gas station in America, just like you buy cigarettes. And there will always be a bottom-of-the-barrel market. But if more of us educate ourselves and we learn about what is happening, how our weed is grown, what's going into it, how is it processed, what's the post-process look like, once people start to become discerning about all of that, then an industry standard develops on its own. When people won't buy shit quality weed, then places that grow that won't be in business long. And that's how it happens. Like the notion that you're going to regulate it away or that you're going to, eventually, I think the weed industry in this country will look just like our alcohol industry does. You will have your Budweisers, you will have your pre-rolls at Walmart, but you will also have craft beer brewers. You will also have shelves of craft beer. You'll have movements of people who now care nothing but about quality. And that's what you see in most of these legal states. It happens on kind of a similar time frame. The first few years, everybody's happy. We get legal weed. We get to buy it in a store. It's the greatest thing we've ever seen. It's so cool. Bring your mom. 3 to 5 years, you start to see the cream float to the top. So you start to see places that are either better at marketing or better at quality. Usually by about 5 years to 7 years after initial legalization, you're going to start to see places that are clearly better at all of this. Because at that point, most of the small companies that got in just because they liked weed and had a little investment money kicking around, those places aren't around anymore. They've either sold out or they've shut their doors because it was too much. And it almost happens consistently. Every legal state happens the same way. I see it happen every time. At about 5 years, you start to see quality hash companies start to pop up, companies that are taking quality a little bit more seriously. You'll probably get one or two of those unicorn organic grows pop up, and it just becomes the customer learning, the customer teaching themselves good from bad, shit quality from dank, and then eventually demanding that of the places that they patronize,
Good point.
Ask the questions.
So
that's why I said, did you go there? Do you have remediated product? I don't know what that is. Well, you probably do, and you can't tell me what is and what isn't, and maybe you should go somewhere else.
Yeah, see, that's a new thing. That's fairly new within the last couple of years is remediated flour. Like that's something that, 6-8 years ago wasn't really a thing. Like remediation was almost exclusively in the hash realm, and now they're using, like, I don't even want to discuss the ins and outs of, everything from UV light. Like I've seen people taking plants and dunking them straight into rubbing alcohol, hydrogen peroxide. I think that initially this whole thing was supposed to be disgusting things that I've seen. Like that was what the topic was supposed to be about. I don't know that we did as much about that, but while I'm talking about it, when we get into remediation that you've seen, or at least the attempted salvage of hot dog product, like just the worst of the worst. Yeah, I mean everything from taking your plant and dunking it into solvents of some sort, cleaner of some sort, all sorts of nasty, baking soda. Once again, depends on the product, the problem. If it's bugs, there's only so much you can do about a plant that is covered in mites, But like things like mildew, stuff like that would test problematic is the sort of stuff that you often see remediated on shelves, because usually with mold and stuff, they'll shine a bunch of UV light on it, expose it to ozone. I've seen that one too. And that's nasty. It's nasty. Ozone is dangerous shit, man. I've seen people use it in commercial grows. I've seen people use it on weed. It's nasty. Yeah, ozone is nasty.
Well, this is a good show.
Oh, yeah.
Nice little talk. I love it. I love this. We're going to call this one Burp in the Bag. Because when you come back on the show a second time, it's just a topic we let you free flow on. Just burp the bag, baby.
I like it. Yeah, that was a good one. Like I said, man, it's one of those things that of topics that I'm passionate about. Exposing some of the things that are happening in the commercial market is right up there with me with open source genetics. They're two topics that if I get on a podcast like this, it's almost something I try to talk about every single time. Is just educating people on the product they're consuming, educating them on the people that are producing it, whether that's the breeder that breeds your seeds or the growers that are growing your weed, and being passionate about it, trying to find better quality and always being on that hunt for what else is out there.
Nice. Love it. Anything else to say before we say goodbye?
www.terpfiend.com, TERPFI3ND.com. Go get some seeds.
And then check you out on your Terp Talks too. You do an hour show twice a week.
Yeah, so right this minute, Instagram just shut my Instagram page down where we have been doing our live podcasts. I'm looking at other options for getting that off of Instagram, because I'm tired of producing content for a platform that doesn't appreciate us as content creators. And
Amen.
B, because I'm tired of losing all of my followers, all of my interests, all of my hard work, and all of my pictures. So, you can always check at TerpFiend, at TERP_FI3ND at Instagram. It may be up. We may get it back. Who knows? I also have at Terpy Talk, TERPYTALK. It's just a meme shit posting page of cannabis memes and one-off thoughts and stuff to make people talk, usually. But yeah, man, it's just, I'm not done. We're not, I got to take a couple weeks off for just some downtime and stuff like that. But we're not going anywhere,
No, I hope
We're not
not.
going
I enjoy the
anywhere.
fuck out of you.
Now we're just having fun, man. Like you said, we just started the podcast. We run the Dank Talk, and then we're doing the OG Chat. OG Chat is just me and another friend, another OG, and we just sit down and do this for an hour, and we just off the top of our heads just talk about cannabis and the industry and the business and the cliches and the jokes and the. So we're not going
Nice.
to. I appreciate it, man. I will say, man, I appreciate everybody that's had me on their podcast. It's given me a ton of new views and new likes and new looks as we start our own thing and kind of do our own thing going forward. And so I appreciate you and Earl, man. Earl's been a big supporter of mine for a long time, and I appreciate everything you guys have done.
Man, we'd love to have you back on again soon. Sooner than later, of course, and we appreciate the fuck out of you joining us, and especially hanging out with us too on the Discord night too that we did. That was pretty dope. That was a lot of fun too. So
anytime, man.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I'm always talking
so we're
with
gonna end
somebody.
it, man. Yeah, definitely. So we're gonna end the show a little early, but we love it, man. Big Girl, you got anything else to say before we say goodbye?
Don't forget your CalMag, guys.
Yeah,
CalMag.
check your CalMag.
Cal mag it up, everybody. Peace.